Those are the ground rules. Our speaker is the first female combat veteran to run for president and one of the first elected to Congress. Representative Tulsi Gabbard is a major in the Army National Guard and has served for 16 years, deploying twice to the Middle East. Tulsi has served on the Homeland Security, Foreign Affairs, and Armed Services Committees, in addition to serving as Vice Chair of the DNC. She is running to bring a soldier's heart to the White House. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank you so much. Can I use that mic? Is that all right?
You can absolutely use
Perfect.
that.
Is that all right? You'll need it for questions? Yeah, no problem. Aloha. Aloha. Looks like you guys have a lot of fun here. I love it. Who's it, Jerry, who laid out the ground rules? Is that your name? James. We should bring you to our town hall meetings. Those are great ground rules. Thank you so much, John, for inviting me to come here and just share a few words with all of you today. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to introduce myself. Really appreciate what all of you do as Rotarians. Back in Hawaii, I served as a state legislature, was elected back in 2002. I was the youngest elected official in the state of Hawaii, later served on our Honolulu City Council, one of the largest city councils in the country. My city council district had about 100,000 constituents in it, but we worked hand in hand with Rotarians over the years to address so many of the issues that are challenging our communities, and in those gaps where government's not acting fast enough or there are things that just need to get done, so often it's our Rotarians who gather together to serve the community. So thank you for all that you do to live up to your motto of service above self. Really, that's what it's all about. It's something that as a young girl growing up in Hawaii, I really experienced how service, being of service to others, being of service to God, made me profoundly happy. Happier than if I was doing something for myself. And I'm so grateful to have been able to experience this from a young age, as it has been and continues to be my guiding motivation and inspiration, why I do what I do every day, to live up to those values of service above self, to do my best every day, thinking about how I can best be of service to God, be of service to the people of this country, and to serve our country. As John mentioned, I have served in Congress now for almost 7 years. April makes my 17-year anniversary of serving as a soldier in the Army National Guard. And thank you. I have deployed twice to the Middle East, and I think one of the things that I always remember throughout my service in Congress, and especially now on this presidential campaign, at a time where we as a country are facing incredible divisions amongst us as people, when we look at the hyper-partisanship in Washington, I go back to that first experience that I had when I shipped out to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for my Army basic training, and showed up there. We were all lined up with the drill sergeants yelling at us to toe the line, people from all across the country who were there in our Bravo company, first day of basic training. And I just remember looking across that room as we were standing there in the position of attention, towing the line, and recognizing the diversity, people from all different parts of the country, different races, ethnicities, religions, orientations, all of these different things that make us a diverse and unique country, but that we all stood there together as one. We were all there because of a singular mission of service. Service to our country, respecting each other as fellow Americans, and not allowing anything to pull us away from or distract us from that mission of service. This is what we need so desperately in Washington. It's frustrating to see how so little gets done because too often party is put ahead of country. Special interests or self-serving politicians put their own interests ahead of actually getting things done for the people. And so this experience, that's why when you say a soldier's heart, it really represents these values of service above self that we need to get back into our government so that we really carry out the vision that our founders had for us, that we would be a country led by leaders who are solely committed to serving all the people of this country, not just those who agree with you or not just those who are part of your tribe or your party, but actually taking this mission that we have asked for. When we ask you for your vote, we're asking for your trust to take on that responsibility of service and putting that mission above all else. When I was first elected to Congress in 2012, freshman Democrat, elected from a small state in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, coming into a pretty hyper-partisan environment, which I was well aware of, Republican majority, and I was told right away, don't even try to get legislation passed, don't try to introduce amendments because Republicans are not going to let you do it. You're a Democrat. Those lines are very clearly delineated between the two. That's not why I ran for Congress, to just go to Washington and do nothing. So I immediately started to think about, well, how can I start to build relationships? How can I introduce myself to 434 people and begin to make friends based on respect, regardless of agree, disagree on different issues. And so I started with what I found to be the most universal language that we can all speak together, which is the language of food. Yes? Agree? Yes? So yes, big one up here. So I called my mother back in Hawaii and I asked her, she makes this amazing macadamia nut toffee. I asked if she would make 434 boxes of toffee for every one of my soon-to-be new friends in Congress. She said, yeah, gosh, I think that's a great idea. I'm happy to help. And so I have one more favor to ask. Will you make another 435 bigger boxes of toffee for the staff of every member of Congress? And she paused just for a moment to think about, okay, well, I'm gonna have to go to Costco, get X number more pounds of macadamia nuts, and think about how long it's gonna take. She said, yeah, it's gonna take a little bit longer, but I'm in. I think that's really important. Good idea. So as she was in Hawaii, she's chopping the mac nuts, stirring 2 pots at the same time, pouring the toffee. My dad is the self-appointed quality control in this operation. I'm not even kidding. He took 1 slice out of every single pan that she poured just to make sure. They were all good. They always are. And while they were doing that, I was in DC just handwriting notes to every one of my new colleagues and signing each one of those notes saying that I look forward to serving alongside you. And what was incredible to me was how quickly I got a response. We started delivering what we called these little gifts of Aloha to every one of my colleagues. And when we go to the House floor for votes, the only time we're all in the same physical space together, leaders, senior Republicans who are chairs, Transportation Committee, the Energy Committee, the Appropriations Committee, start to make their way across the House floor, crossing the aisle, looking for me and just saying thank you, introducing themselves, saying I ate all the candy, I need more before I go home this weekend, and then most importantly saying, tell me what's going on in your district. Tell me what issues your constituents are most concerned about. You know, I'm the chair of this committee, or I work on this or that issue. Let's find a way to work together. That single gesture, that small gesture of just reaching out with respect, without any kind of litmus tests or purity tests or anything else, saying, let us serve together, was amazing. And it's what enabled me to be effective throughout my 7 years in Congress, the first 6 of which were in a Republican majority, where I passed the very first bill that I introduced that year. The first year in Congress in 2013 was passed into law and signed by President Obama. It allowed me to pass amendments to important pieces of legislation dealing with education and other issues, even with the Republican leadership opposing the amendment that I offered. Those relationships made it possible for me to be able to get my phone calls answered, for people to come and say, hey, they're telling us to vote against your amendment. Why don't you tell me why I should vote for it? Where I could make the argument based on the substance of the issue, not the partisan politics, but the substance of the issue. where I was able to pass those amendments that people said would be dead on arrival. I tell this story because I think it's so important, because when we talk about treating each other with respect, it starts with leadership. Respect for all Americans, and that's my personal commitment to every one of you, to every single American, to treat you with respect and to always put service to the people and service to our country above all else, ahead of partisan politics, ahead of special interests or profits or all of these other things. This is the mission that I've dedicated my life to, and I hope to be able to serve you in that way. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to... Yeah, you have some time for questions? Yeah.
We will run a little late today, so if you have to leave, that's fine. Questions? Justin's got the speaker. The microphone.
If you have, did we pass out some toffee here? Are you the only one who got, oh, you did. If you've got the gold little wrappers, you can taste the magic macadamia nut toffee.
I was the quality control tester.
There you go.
What is your opinion of this administration's stance toward NATO?
It's hard to tell what this administration's stance is towards NATO, because it seems to change and shift so often. I haven't looked to see what the outcome. I've seen some of the salacious headlines that have come out of the recent meeting that President Trump went to. I think it's a fair assessment for us to look at both the funding structure of NATO as well as what NATO's mission and role and objective is. I think this should be a part of our foreign policy conversation about our ongoing relationships and alliances with other countries. My focus has been on foreign policy and national security throughout my time in Congress, as John mentioned, on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Armed Services and Homeland Security Committees. And the message that I've been sharing with people on this campaign really is that our foreign policy is central to every other issue that we face. We can't disconnect it from anything else for a whole host of reasons, one of which is where our taxpayer dollars are going, and how for a very long time now our country's foreign policy has been one of regime change and toppling dictators and waging wars in other countries, the likes of which we've seen in Iraq and Libya and Syria, at great cost to us, great cost to our men and women in uniform, and at great cost to us as taxpayers. And so the question is, have these wars, have they benefited our country and strengthened our national security or not? And when you look at them and the fact that Al-Qaeda and ISIS, these terrorist groups are stronger because of these wars, I think you can answer that question and say, no, they have not served our country's national interests. So when we look at the over $6 trillion that we've spent on waging these regime change wars just since 9/11 alone, and we think about, gosh, how can we have better spent those dollars on investing in infrastructure, on investing in education, on continuing to empower and encourage entrepreneurship and small businesses? How can we better utilize those dollars to serve the needs of the American people here at home? And so I think that we need a sea change in our foreign policy. And I bring that depth of experience gained through 7 years in Congress, serving on these committees, as well as the experience personally that I have as a soldier, to be prepared to walk in on day one, to fulfill that responsibility of being commander-in-chief of our armed forces, to change our foreign policy, to end these regime change wars, work to end this new Cold War and nuclear arms race that we're in now with escalating tensions between the United States and other nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China, and instead redirect our dollars here at home and continue to engage with other countries to be a force for good, maximizing diplomatic measures and opportunities, recognizing that the only alternative to diplomacy is war. And I think war should always be the last resort to keep the American people safe.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
service. I apologize, I really don't know much about your campaign. It seems like the only thing the media picked up on was Hillary Clinton attacking you as a Russian spy. And I'd like you to clear up that issue, please.
Where do I begin? In all seriousness, the baseless accusation that was made was deeply offensive, not just to me. Look, I'm very, very proud to wear the uniform of this nation. It was the attacks on 9/11 that, like for so many people across this country, that motivated me to enlist in the military, to do whatever I could to go after those who attacked us on that day, defeat that evil. I started out as a private. I served 4 years enlisted in the Army, served in Iraq for a year in 2005 during the height of the war in a medical unit. Came back, went through officer candidate school, had the great honor of leading a platoon during my second deployment. I am grateful for the opportunity to serve this country and have dedicated my entire adult life to doing so. So the irresponsible and offensive, baseless accusation made by the former Secretary of State should be seen for exactly what it is. It is an attempt to silence not just me, but people like me, fellow Americans, fellow veterans, who have the audacity to challenge the Hillary Clinton foreign policy that has cost us so dearly as a country in human lives, American lives, the lives of people in the countries where we've waged these unnecessary wars, and it's cost us dearly in taxpayer dollars. I'm seeking to change that, to change this warmongering foreign policy into one that actually serves the best interests of the American people and our country's security. I hope that clears it up for you. Thank you.
And also thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I greatly appreciate your comments regarding bipartisanship. I think it's they're invaluable, especially in these times.
Yeah.
And it's not really a question, but I would ask that if you're not successful in your run for president, that you please consider lobbying to be the next speaker, assuming you folks keep the, because that's exactly what we're going to need, to make this country move again in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just comment briefly to your comment. I'm actually not running for re-election to my seat in the House of Representatives. I'm dedicating myself towards making sure that I can help lead and unite our country, motivated by these principles of service above self as President and Commander-in-Chief. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
As a Democrat, the advocacy is for gun control. As a soldier, you may have a different idea. I'd like to know your thoughts.
Thank you. I actually go not from the perspective of being a soldier, but from the perspective of standing with our Constitution and thinking about what's in the best interest of our country and our people. I don't think it's a contradiction to say I believe that we must hold our Second Amendment rights, which I do, while also coming together to try to make sure that our kids and our communities are safe. I think there are sensible pieces of legislation, some of which we've already passed through the House of Representatives, that's awaiting action in the Senate, that are good examples of that. Things like universal background checks, legislation that we passed that would close what they call the Charleston loophole, that allowed that shooter to be able to get his hands on the gun that he used to shoot up people in church that day. I think there's probably more that we in this country can agree on with regards to some of these sensible pieces of gun safety legislation than we disagree on. Just like we're talking about the hyper-partisan divide, I think this is one of those issues that unfortunately has become so polarizing that people aren't even willing to have the conversation. This is the kind of thing that I'm appreciating that we're doing in our town hall meetings that we have across your state here. We have people bringing different perspectives on these issues and really engaging in that respectful dialogue. We may not end up agreeing on everything, but ultimately what I have found is we can all agree that we want to make sure that our kids are safe when they're going to school, that we can go to a place of worship or the grocery store without having to live in fear that we're going to be shot. I'm not naive to think that only passing this legislation will completely solve this problem. I think there are much deeper issues and problems in our country that we've got to get together to confront together. And there are many contributing factors that we've got to examine to see how this trend is unfortunately moving in the wrong direction, that we're having more school shootings, that we're seeing more violence that's happening within some of our cities and communities across the country. I think we've got to get to the root cause of these problems together and do what we can to try to prevent more of these tragedies from occurring. Thank you.
Conversations about climate change and environmental policy have changed substantially, often along party lines over the past few years. If you were to be elected to the office of president, what would be your policy regarding the environment moving forward?
Thank you. This is another one of those issues, as you're pointing out, unfortunately, that's become very polarized, especially around the use of the term climate change, that it can elicit one response from one group of people and a very different response from another group of people, which, again, this is where, yes, challenge, opportunity. Growing up in Hawaii, you know, I'm a surfer, I love hiking, I love being outdoors, and protection of the environment for us as kids growing up, it wasn't something that we had to be told or taught. It was just something that, you know, we did because we cared about our home. And I think there's so much that we can do when we start from that place. I had a conversation with a very conservative gentleman in Iowa not too long ago, strong supporter of Donald Trump, and it was questionable whether we'd find any common ground, but he brought up the issue of climate change and he thought, all right, we're going to duke this out. We're going to battle through this. But once we actually started talking, I said, okay, let's just set aside the term climate change and let's start with the basics of clean water. We all need clean water to live, to survive. Every single living being needs clean water to survive. Clean air. This is something that we all want for ourselves and our kids, and know that for generations to come, you'll have clean air to breathe. That these, you know, trees and mountains and waterways and the oceans, these are natural resources that we want to be able to preserve. Let's start with that. And it turns out this gentleman that I was talking to, he came from a family of farmers, and he said, you know what, soil conservation is something that's really important to me. I'm really passionate about making sure that our soil is rich for us to be able to continue to grow food to feed people. I completely agree. You know, some of the multinational agribusiness corporations and their farming practices are some of the greatest contributors to the environmental threats that we face. And those threats include ruining our soil quality. So as president, it's these kinds of conversations and this getting past the divisive and polarizing rhetoric and just being able to talk to each other with respect as people about what is important to us all and what kind of country and future we want to leave behind for our kids, number one. And number two is recognizing that as we find common ground, as we seek to move forward together as a country, we work with other countries to be able to deal with the global environmental threats that we face. Because that's the reality. Even if we make certain changes and transitions here in the United States, it only begins to scratch the surface of the global threats that exist. And it requires, again, foreign policy central to everything else. We've got to be able to work with China, got to be able to work with Russia and India and other countries. While we may have differences, we have many areas of shared and common interest that we need to work together on for the sake of our future on this planet.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you,
for
John.
coming here today. Would you be able to stay around for a
Yes.
few minutes to?
Absolutely.
Well, let us end the meeting with a four-way test. Is it